Hill House loomed atop the hill like a sentinel of the past, its dark silhouette cutting through the soft mist of the valley below. Its facade, weathered by decades of storms and neglect, seemed to ripple under the pale moonlight, the cracked windows gazing like vacant eyes. For years, the house had been the subject of hushed whispers in the nearby town of Blackwood. Stories of strange noises, fleeting shadows, and cold drafts that came from nowhere were passed down like ghostly folklore. Children dared each other to climb the overgrown path, only to retreat when the towering iron gates seemed to groan in protest. On this quiet October night, the air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. A single light flickered in the window of the east wing, a wing abandoned for over 50 years. Eleanor Harper, a historian with a penchant for uncovering secrets, gripped the leather-bound journal in her hands as she stared at the light from the safety of her car. She had come to Hill House to write its story, to separate fact from fiction. Yet, as the night deepened, a chill crept into her thoughts. For in the stillness of the house, something seemed to stir as though it were waiting, not for an intruder, but for her. Eleanor Harper had always been drawn to forgotten places. As a historian specializing in architectural history, she saw buildings not as mere structures, but as vessels of memory, each brick and beam holding the whispers of those who had lived and died within their walls. Her fascination with Hill House began a year ago when she stumbled upon an old photograph in a dusty library archive. The image, dated 1928, depicted Hill House in its prime, a grand estate with pristine gardens, bustling servants, and a family of 5 standing proudly on the front steps. But there was something odd about the photograph. The youngest child, a girl of no more than 6, was looking away from the camera, her gaze fixed on something or someone, just outside the frame. That image lingered with Eleanor, compelling her to dig deeper. She uncovered fragments of Hill House's history, the tragic deaths of its last inhabitants, mysterious disappearances, and rumors of a family curse. The house had been abandoned for decades, its ownership tied up in legal disputes, and its reputation keeping potential buyers at bay. Now, standing before the wrought iron gates, Eleanor felt a strange mix of excitement and dread. She had been granted permission to document the estate, her research funded by a local historical society eager to preserve what remained of Hill House. Her plan was simple: spend a week exploring the house, cataloging its artifacts, and piecing together its story. The gates creaked open with an effortful push, revealing a winding gravel path that led to the front entrance. The house was even larger up close, its towering columns and intricate stonework hinting at a once glorious past. The air was cooler here, and the silence was heavy, broken only by the crunch of Eleanor's boots on the gravel. Inside the house was a time capsule of decay and grandeur. Dusty chandeliers hung from ornate ceilings, their crystals catching the faint light of her lantern. Faded wallpaper peeled away in long strips, revealing layers of forgotten colors. Furniture, draped in white sheets, stood like ghosts of the past, their outlines hinting at lives once lived here. Eleanor set up her workspace in the grand dining room, where a long table stretched beneath an opulent yet tarnished chandelier. Her equipment, a laptop, camera, and notepad, looked out of place against the aged backdrop. She opened the leather-bound journal, a gift from her mentor, and began to sketch the room. But as she worked, a peculiar sensation settled over her. It was as though the house was observing her, its silence no longer passive but expectant. The faint sound of footsteps echoed from the second floor, too deliberate to be the groans of an old house. "Probably just the wind," she murmured, though the words felt hollow. As the days passed, Eleanor's research yielded fascinating discoveries. She found letters tucked into books, faded photographs in hidden compartments, and a set of keys that unlocked forgotten rooms. Each artifact told a story, but none provided answers to the questions that haunted her. Why had the family abandoned the house? And what had become of the girl in the photograph? One evening, as she explored the East Wing, a part of the house sealed off since the 1950s, Eleanor stumbled upon a child's bedroom. The air here was different, colder, and tinged with a faint scent of lavender. A small bed stood against the wall, its once bright quilt now faded and moth-eaten. Toys were scattered across the floor, and a wooden rocking horse sat eerily still in the corner. On the dresser, she found a diary belonging to Lily, the youngest daughter of the family. The entries began innocently enough, recounting games played with siblings and summer picnics. But as Eleanor read on, the tone shifted. Lily wrote of shadows that moved on their own, of whispers in the night, and of a man in the mirror who told her secrets. The final entry sent a shiver down Eleanor's spine. The man in the mirror says we're not alone. He says the house belongs to him now. Eleanor closed the diary, her breath visible in the icy air. As she placed it back on the dresser, the rocking horse creaked, moving gently as though pushed by an unseen hand. She stepped back, her heart pounding, and whispered to herself, "It's just the wind." But deep down, she knew better. Eleanor couldn't shake the feeling that she was no longer alone in Hill House. The diary's unsettling final entry and the inexplicable movement of the rocking horse gnawed at her rational mind. She tried to dismiss her unease as exhaustion or her imagination playing tricks on her, but the house had a way of asserting itself, refusing to let her forget its presence. The following day, Eleanor focused on cataloging items in the drawing room, a once opulent space now layered with dust and shadows. Among the cluttered bookshelves and tarnished candelabras, she discovered a small box of photographs. Most were mundane, family outings, holiday celebrations, but one stood out. It depicted a man, tall and severe, standing in the corner of a room she didn't recognize. His face was partially obscured by shadow, but his presence felt wrong, as though he didn't belong in the frame. Eleanor tucked the photograph into her journal, intending to study it later. But as she moved to close the box, a sharp knock echoed through the room. She froze, her eyes darting to the doorway. "Hello," she called out, her voice trembling. Silence. Taking a deep breath, she stepped into the hallway, her lantern casting flickering shadows on the walls. The house seemed to hold its breath, the air thick with tension. As she reached the base of the grand staircase, a faint melody drifted down from above, soft, lilting, and impossibly out of place. Her grip tightened on the lantern as she climbed the stairs, each step creaking under her weight. The music grew louder, leading her to a room she hadn't explored yet. The door was slightly ajar, and as she pushed it open, the melody abruptly stopped. The room was a study, its walls lined with bookshelves and its centerpiece, a grand piano, its keys yellowed with age. Eleanor approached cautiously, her heart pounding. She ran her fingers over the piano's surface, disturbing a layer of dust, and noticed a single key pressed down. Before she could process what she was seeing, the door slammed shut behind her. Eleanor spun around, her lantern swinging wildly and casting distorted shadows across the room. "Who's there?" she demanded, her voice breaking. No answer. Only the sound of her own rapid breathing filled the air. She hurried to the door, her hands trembling as she fumbled with the handle. It wouldn't budge. Panic surged through her, but then, as suddenly as it had closed, the door creaked open on its own. Eleanor stumbled back into the hallway, her mind racing. She wanted to leave to escape the oppressive atmosphere of the house, but her determination to uncover its secrets kept her rooted. She couldn't leave, not yet. That night, she slept fitfully, her dreams plagued by shadowy figures and disembodied whispers. She woke to the sound of footsteps outside her room. Grabbing her lantern, she opened the door to find the hallway empty. But on the floor, leading away from her room, were wet footprints that disappeared into the darkness. Eleanor followed them, her pulse racing. The prints led her to the east wing, where the air was colder and the silence deeper. As she approached Lily's room, a faint giggle echoed down the corridor. She pushed the door open and gasped. The rocking horse was moving again, its rhythmic creak filling the room. On the bed lay Lily's diary, open to a blank page. As Eleanor stepped closer, words began to appear on the page, written by an unseen hand. "Get out while you can." The lantern flickered, and Eleanor felt a presence behind her. She turned, but no one was there, only the oppressive darkness of the hallway. Her resolve faltered. She couldn't deny it any longer. Hill House was alive, and it was watching her. Eleanor awoke to the sound of wind howling through the halls, though every window in Hill House had been firmly shut. The atmosphere felt heavier, charged with an energy that pressed against her chest like a weight. She knew she had to confront whatever had taken root here, if not for her research, then for her own sanity. She carried her lantern and a diary as she made her way back to Lily's room. The house seemed to guide her this time, the familiar creaks of the floorboards replaced by an eerie silence. Every shadow she passed felt deeper, every corner more suffocating. The diary sat on the bed, still open, the hastily scrawled warning glaring at her. She hesitated, but curiosity pushed her forward. Flipping through its pages, she noticed something she hadn't before, an entire section written in a shaky, desperate hand. It detailed the family's final days in Hill House, how the father, Walter Blackwood, had become obsessed with a mirror in his study. Lily's words were chilling. He says the man in the mirror shows him things. Mother wants to leave, but father won't let us. The man says we all belong here now. The mirror. Eleanor's pulse quickened as she recalled the photograph of the shadowed man and the unmarked study door she had passed several times without entering. She had dismissed it before, but now it called to her like an open wound, begging to be touched. When she arrived, the door was ajar, the room beyond bathed in an unnatural glow. Inside, the ornate mirror stood taller than any she'd ever seen, its gilded frame a testament to opulence, now tarnished with age. The surface shimmered, but it didn't reflect her or anything in the room. Instead, it showed the Blackwood family, frozen in an unsettling tableau, the parents seated stiffly, the older children standing behind them, and Lily in the center, clutching a doll. Eleanor's breath caught as the figures began to move. They turned their heads in unison, their hollow eyes locking onto hers. "You shouldn't be here," they said in a voice that was not their own, a chorus of anguish and malice. Suddenly, the room seemed to twist, the walls closing in and the air growing colder. Eleanor stumbled back, but her reflection in the mirror remained motionless, staring at her with an expression of calm she did not feel. "What do you want?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the roar of blood in her ears. The reflection smiled, its movements now independent of her own. "To remember, to remain." The surface of the mirror rippled like water, and Eleanor's reflection stepped through, solidifying into a shadowy figure with her face, but none of her warmth. Before she could react, it lunged at her, its icy hands gripping her wrists and pulling her closer to the glass. "No," she cried, struggling against the inhuman strength. But the shadow's pull was relentless. In a final act of desperation, Eleanor grabbed the lantern and smashed it against the mirror. Flames erupted, licking at the gilded frame as the shadow screamed, its form dissolving into smoke. The mirror cracked, its surface fracturing into a spiderweb of broken reflections. The house seemed to groan in agony, the walls shuddering as if releasing a deep breath. Eleanor staggered out of the room, the fire spreading behind her, consuming the study and the cursed mirror within. She didn't stop running until she was outside, the cool night air filling her lungs. Behind her, Hill House stood silhouetted against the flames, its dark secrets finally being reduced to ash. Eleanor stood at the edge of the hill, the night air cool against her flushed skin. Hill House was engulfed in flames, its skeletal frame illuminated in flickering orange and red. The oppressive weight that had hung over her since her arrival was gone, replaced by a strange lightness, as if the house had finally exhaled its long-held secrets into the night. She clutched Lily's diary to her chest, the only artifact she had managed to save. The small, leather-bound book felt heavier now, its pages filled with truths that no one would believe. Eleanor wondered if she should share the story or let it fade into the ashes with the house. As the fire consumed the structure, she thought she heard voices, soft whispers carried by the wind. She couldn't make out the words, but they didn't feel threatening. Instead, they carried a note of relief, as if the spirits bound to Hill House had been freed at last. The fire burned long into the early hours of the morning. When the sun began to rise, the house was no more than a smoldering ruin. Eleanor remained, watching the smoke curl into the brightening sky, until the first responders arrived. "What happened?" a firefighter asked, his voice breaking the heavy silence. Eleanor hesitated before replying, her gaze fixed on the charred remains. "It was an accident," she said softly. "The house, it didn't want to stand anymore." The firefighter gave her a puzzled look, but said nothing more. Eleanor left the hill with Lily's diary in her bag and a sense of closure she hadn't expected. But as she drove away, the rearview mirror caught her attention. For a brief moment, she thought she saw the faint outline of a figure sitting in the back seat, a young girl clutching a doll, her eyes wide and watchful. Eleanor blinked, and the figure was gone. The road ahead stretched into the horizon, bathed in the soft light of a new day. As Eleanor drove further from the hill, the ashes of Hill House fading into the distance, she couldn't shake the feeling that some doors, once opened, never truly close, and that perhaps the house had simply found a new way to remember.